I went into Anora excited to see another one of Sean Baker's works, but left feeling somewhat disappointed. My main grievance with the film was that I felt like the character Anora, who prefers the name Annie, was two-dimensional. I wanted to know more about her previous relationships, her family dynamic, her inner monologue. But without that, I had a hard time believing that a strong-willed woman like her would accept a proposal from a 21-year-old boy and stick around through all the shit he puts her through. Of course, not all directors need to hand you information about a character on a silver platter in order for you to understand the film. But here, the lack of context around Annie's life made her character feel trivial. I walked out of the theater feeling like I just watched a police chase with some stripping thrown in the mix for no clear reason. I wanted to root for Annie, to cry with her, but instead I felt like this was a case of a poorly written female character. Not only was she poorly written, but I feel like the element of her being a stripper was used only as visual entertainment. The pink lights of a strip club and woman in metallic spandex is an image we're all familiar with, and one that I think directors often throw in as an easy vibe curator without it telling a bigger story. Here, the story of a woman being looked down upon for being a stripper is a storyline evocative of Pretty Woman. I was waiting for Anora to say something fresh and new about stripping, and more broadly about being a woman that men look down upon. I wanted to leave Anora feeling the way I felt after I first watched Zola, a movie with a strong-willed female character whose unique filmmaking style left me feeling invigorated. Zola has all the action Anora has, while still portraying the lead female character as the complex person she is. Welcome back to Silver Screen Queens, a deep dive into the portrayal of women on screen. Warning, there are spoilers in today's episode as well as mature themes. Viewer discretion is advised. There was some discourse on TikTok on how Zola was a more successful version of Anora without all the hype and Oscar buzz. TikTok user @ItGirlKaylin describes her thoughts on Anora and how she fears the conversation around the movie would have been different if the lead character was a Black woman.
When I was watching Anora, I have to say, as a Black woman, I couldn't believe how much Oscar buzz there was surrounding Mikey's performance, and not because of her acting ability. I think she is obviously amazing. Like, she ate down that character. Could you just imagine if it was like a Black woman playing that role? It's like a lot, especially in the audience that I watched it with, there was like a lot of laughs in the way that she was like telling off those guys, and she just had a take no shit attitude, and she was so New York. Like, she is a stripper, but she's like tough, and I think that was a lot of her personality, especially in like the middle. I don't know, I feel like if a Black woman was playing that role, it would be deemed as ratchet, or it would be deemed as not an Oscar-worthy conversation. Or scream at the guys and stuff like that. I feel like when you're a Black woman, you just are ingrained with these kind of like respectability politics, and you already know that you're seen as loud and aggressive, and so I don't think it would be as funny or a joke, or it wouldn't be as noteworthy if we saw a Black woman doing that. Whereas when I saw Nora doing it in the theaters, like, people were laughing. It was like, it kind of was played as like kind of this joke. It went on for so long. I don't think a Black woman would be afforded the same kind of conversation around her performance while playing a role like Anora.
Quote, I don't think a Black woman would be afforded the same kind of conversation around her performance while playing a role like Anora is the main point I want to talk about today. My goal today is not to speak for Black women, but to amplify their voices and to create a conversation around topics that Kaylin and other TikTok users have brought up. I also want to make it clear that me critiquing the writing of Anora is in no way a diss at Mikey Madison's performance, and I'm not implying that Sean Baker set out to write a two-dimensional female character. I myself am a fan of Sean Baker's other works. And for those who enjoyed Anora, I hope you stick with me, and maybe I can convince you to watch Zola if you haven't already, a movie whose strong female lead is amplified by clever dialogue, creative cinematography, and a fresh take on the stripper movie subgenre. Zola is a 2020 film based off a 148 tweet thread by Asia Zola King, recounting her wild, real-life experience after meeting a customer named Jess while she was working as a waitress at Hooters. The film follows the chaos that unfolds after their encounter as told by the Twitter thread. In the movie, Jess is renamed Stefanie, played by Riley Keough. The film follows Stefanie and Zola, played by Taylour Paige, as they make their way down to Florida to dance for some extra cash, accompanied by Stefanie's boyfriend Derek, played by Nicholas Braun, and her pimp X, played by Coleman Domingo. Director Janiska Bravo read the Twitter thread back in 2015 and immediately fell in love with it. Black Twitter can be credited with elevating the story, as they, quote, minted it the Thoughtacy, likening King to a Black millennial Homer for her witty and epic prose. Could this Twitter thread become an ancient text for future generations? In all seriousness, though, social media has redefined our language and the ways in which we communicate, for better or for worse. Something that Bravo talks about in relation to the Twitter thread is how it carefully underscores trauma with humor.
I read the story in 2015 in October when it came out on Twitter. I immediately fell in love with it. I thought, this is my next movie. I'm the right director for this. I'm the best director for this. And why I felt I was the best director for it was the tone that was being struck. It was very funny, but also really disturbing. And I feel I had kind of made this corner for myself of making stressful comedies.
Zola experienced a lot in the 48 hours she spent with Jess/Stefanie. But her use of humor cushions the blow of the trauma she endured. The movie is extremely successful not only in translating these tweets into a screenplay, but also in keeping the balance of humor. This balancing of humor with misfortune was integral in allowing the audience to see Zola not just as a sex worker, but as a partner, a friend, and more broadly as a person whose identity is not solely tied to her occupation.
You want to hear a story about how me and this bitch here fell out? It's kind of long, but it's full of suspense.
A large theme in the film is that Zola feels ostracized, particularly within the confines of the group, but more broadly as she enters Florida. Without explicitly telling us, you can see Zola's shift in attitude once they reach Florida. Stefanie's in the front seat using blatant AAVE, while Zola sits there visibly uncomfortable, replying to Stefanie's long-winded story, word, as she looks out the window.
Clean your butt! I'm done! Turn that shit the fuck up!
Word. As she does this, we see a cross and a Confederate flag on the side of the highway. The shot lingers on this flag as they drive by and the music fades out. There is this sense that Zola has been dropped into another world, one that wants to make it clear that she is different and possibly not welcome. This becomes even more clear through costume design. The outfit Zola wears on the ride down to Florida is a blue and black checkered two-piece, reminiscent of Dorothy's signature blue gingham. Zola, like Dorothy, has been dropped off into another world, one far from home, one in which she feels fearful and uncomfortable in, and throughout the duration of her trip, she desperately wants to click her heels and go back home. Though spearheading much of the stripping industry as we know it, Black women are largely left out of the stories we see and hear around this topic. Stripping is a form of entertainment that evolved from burlesque, and in burlesque, white dancers routinely adopted racial stereotypes to elicit cheap laughs from the audience, while Black and white dancers were continually segregated. When Josephine Baker performed with the Ziegfeld Follies, quote, some of the reviews attacked Baker specifically by mapping current racial stereotypes and crippling expectations onto her and her performance, end quote. This backlash made it twice as hard for Black dancers to be appreciated as the talented performers they were. They had to fight against both misogyny and racism. Once burlesque evolved into stripping, this fight to be seen and appreciated did not get any easier. Dr. Siobhan Brooks, professor at Cal State University and sex work advocate, talked to PBS about microaggressions and blatant discrimination against Black sex workers in the 90s.
Dancers wear body lotion, right? Everybody wore some type of perfume or body lotion. And when it was a Black dancer, sometimes she would swing on the pole and somebody, white dancer might say, oh, there's too much baby oil or something that this person wore. And so these are all messagings, the messages that you don't belong, right? So eventually we lost a lot of those Black dancers.
Though set in the mid-2010s, Zola also experiences microaggressions. While dancing at the strip club in Florida, a patron tells her that she looks, quote, a lot like Whoopi Goldberg. YouTuber Intellectual Media, in a video titled A Black History of Stripper Culture, talks about the emergence of Black strip clubs in the 90s after many clubs at this time refused to hire Black dancers. She analyzes two movies that came out in the 90s, Independence Day and The Players Club, both of which feature a Black female dancer as a central character.
In both films, the stripper career was depicted as limiting or a step to what's next, something with an expiration date that could ruin your life if you did it too long or lost your boundaries.
Something I appreciate about Zola is that stripping is not a pit stop to a greater goal. Zola never talks down on the profession and embraces it for all it is, the beautiful and the ugly. One of my favorite scenes in the film is when Zola gets to the strip club in Florida and she looks in the mirror and says, "Who you gonna be tonight, Zola?" Followed by a montage of her in different outfits duplicated by way of mirrors. A dreamy piano glissando plays with each outfit change. This makes it apparent that this is performance for Zola. This is art. Stripping in this movie is portrayed as less of an act for just men to view, but more as a performance art. When Zola dances at the strip club in Florida, the shots are accompanied by a melodic song and the cuts are rhythmic. It's not the format we are used to seeing stripping in. The club music is drowned out and the thrusting becomes a fluid theatrical movement. The Chicago collective Ho History Project aims to challenge the misconception that POC sex workers never existed. Quote, "Typically the faces and voices that we hear or see are white, cis, thin sex workers. When we focus more on the stories and histories of BIPOC within this community and industry, we are able to bring other aspects into focus." End quote. Baseline, it is important to uplift the stories of Black women, especially in an industry whose history has been whitewashed. The story that Zola is able to portray is of a real-life experience from a Black sex worker's POV. But this story would not have been as successfully portrayed on the silver screen if it wasn't for Bravo's expert directorial style and Taylour Paige's incredible acting. On the menu tonight, I'm going to be making Zola a peach Bellini. So we have Prosecco, some mint, and some canned peaches. I don't have a blender here, so it's not gonna be a frozen fancy one. We're just gonna use the juice from here, okay? And I don't wanna hear anything about it. Let's open up this Prosecco. Right. Oh. I overreacted. The glass I have is pretty small, so we're just gonna do a little bit. I don't know if you're supposed to shake up Prosecco. I'm like, I don't even want to hear if this is right. Is it? And then let's open the peaches. Okay, wait. ASMR. Nice. I actually like canned peaches, so I'll be eating these. Okay, nice. And now we precariously shake it up. Oh, it's already spilling. Oh, wait, no, it's fine. Okay. And now we're gonna pour it into our glass. Wow, that's pretty. Okay, let's take a little sprig of mint. Let's find a really good piece. Cheers, let's give this a taste. Oh, it's yum. Oh, that's so yummy. Yep, this is a win for sure. Taylour Paige certainly did not get enough credit for her role as Zola. First of all, Paige worked as a stripper at the club Crazy Girls for a month to prepare for this role, immersing herself in this setting to more accurately portray the character.
She brought me in to meet the owner, and he was like, "Stand up, turn around. All right, come in on Monday, we'll see how you do." And I'm like, I don't know how to do any of this. And I'm not telling him that I'm doing the movie. And also, I really did need the money.
As I mentioned previously, this role was not an easy feat, as Zola balances humor with intense emotions. In order to accurately portray her, we need to see Zola's humor as well as her compassion, wit, and integrity. And Taylour Paige does just that. Going back to TikTok user ItGirlKaylin's comments, I wonder why there wasn't the hype for Taylour Paige's portrayal of Zola as there was for Mikey Madison's portrayal of Anora. Well, for starters, Zola didn't have the $18 million marketing budget that Anora did, commodifying Annie's story into novelty t-shirts and thongs. This marketing effort positions Annie as an object, furthering my interpretation that Anora was written as a two-dimensional character. And I'm not the only one who thinks that. In Ayanna Dossier's essay, The 24-Hour Working Girl, she says, quote, "The irony of Baker's authentic style is that it actually just mirrors the perspective of a client. for the film is not interested in Annie as much as it is in transgressing her boundaries. This is evident with her name in the film. She prefers Annie, but is called Anora throughout the film." End quote. As a director, Sean Baker is less interested in portraying Annie as a complex character as he is with using her as visual entertainment. Annie's character is confined to the role of sex worker, with the men around her constantly looking down on her for her occupation. And Baker could have used this degradation to further a message about the stigma of sex workers, but instead the treatment of Annie seems to perpetuate the exploitation of sex workers. Stripping in Zola is displayed as an art, and Zola is the artist. As the publication Them puts it, quote, "The film paints a complex portrait of modern Black femininity and showcases Zola's clever tactics to narrowly avoid exploitation as a sex worker, depicting the industry through a refreshingly judgment-free lens," end quote. Not only is Zola not confined to the role of sex worker, but she is also able to show a range of emotions that I feel is lacking in Anora. Annie seems to have two moods in the film, happiness and anger. And the contrast between the two emotions is so severe that when Annie expresses anger, the reaction from the audience is unfortunately laughter. Laughter at her expense. In Zola, there is a focus on this aspect of being online. We hear the Twitter sound effect to indicate a line from the Twitter thread. Stefanie's boyfriend Derek vlogs their trip down to Miami as the car raps the song Hannah Montana by Migos, after which they laugh at a fail video on Vine. Sometimes in modern films, the addition of elements of social media feels forced and unnecessary, like the movie did so in order to appear relatable. But in Zola, these additions are part of a larger message. Aside from the fact that this movie was born from an online discussion, there is this thematic element that posting online is a reflection of our moods and feelings, leading to a tendency to overshare. Director Janiska Bravo talks about Clueless being one of her favorite movies, and how when she first saw it, she wanted to talk just like the characters. She also expresses how in the time between Clueless and Zola, there has been a lot of rot, supposedly referring to brain rot as a result of excess social media use. She says, quote, "If Clueless is candy, then Zola is the cavity." Social media has changed the way we communicate and even speak, but it's important to note that a lot of internet slang has its roots in AAVE. Tagwa Shamet writes in a piece for the Commonwealth Times, quote, "AAVE is being swallowed into internet culture and erased from the collective, but Black people will never forget the dialect they created. Ebonics is not ghetto talk, it is not violent, it is not your internet lingo. It is the dialect of thousands of people. Give them the respect they deserve." End quote. Stefanie's Blaccent, aka use of AAVE by a non-Black individual, is uncomfortable to watch. Taylour Paige describes it as Riley Keough being in blackface for the entire film. In this way, Stefanie's character is indicative of the white burlesque performers, adopting racial stereotypes in their performances. Cultural appropriation is a huge part of Stefanie's character, with her often copying Zola's mannerisms and speech. But of course, Stefanie's character acts as a critique of white people adopting AAVE. Her character is meant to make the audience feel uncomfortable. Since the Twitter thread from Asia King only tells her side of the story, there were a lot of different ways that the character of Stefanie could have been portrayed. Bravo does something really smart, because when Stefanie gets to tell her side of the story in a caveat, she constantly degrades Zola, picturing her begging for Stefanie's attention and wearing a trash bag.
And she was like, "Let me dance at the club he promoted." And I was like, is that how that works?
So we can see that Stefanie is a jealous person who looks down on Zola, but really wants to be here. I mean, this is sort of indicative from the first time that they meet. The first thing Stefanie says to Zola is that she's jealous of her boobs, that she has the most perfect boobs. Co-writer of Zola, the playwright Jeremy O'Harris, describes the movie as a queer love story. Quote, "It's a love that I think a lot of women, both bi, pan, lesbian, and also straight, have with other women they meet, right? The sort of complicated, I don't know what this is, but I know I want to be you and inside you and be with you completely." End quote. When Zola and Stefanie first meet, there is this tension between them, followed by a musical score that is akin to a twinkle. Zola and Stefanie then constantly text each other to the point where Zola's boyfriend gets agitated with her for being on her phone so much. To me, the relationship between Zola and Stefanie is all-consuming, as a new friendship can be, But it isn't romantic. It is clear that Stefanie lacks a sense of identity and finds it difficult to stand up for herself, and as a result, she mimics Zola and lets her pimp X walk all over her. Zola is the exact opposite of Stefanie. She is sure of herself and assertive. Things become really tense when X uploads a pic of Stefanie and Zola to the website Backpage, a website used to buy and sell sex. After they get to a hotel, Zola confronts Stefanie about how she was lied to, getting close to her and raising her voice. Zola sets boundaries and tries to leave, but ultimately stays when Stefanie says that she's scared to do this alone. Though Stefanie is the antagonist of this film, Zola feels compassion for her and acts as a friend in this moment.
I'll do everything for my baby.
I think the love that Jeremy O. Harris describes between Stefanie and Zola is apparent here. It's the kind of love that many women are familiar with. The kind of love that we extend to other women when they need our help. Love that comes from a place of compassion and understanding. When Stefanie gets paid $150 for having sex with the first man, Zola is appalled and says my second favorite line in the film,
"Pussy is worth thousands, bitch."
Zola then edits the Backpage ad to increase the price and takes new photos of Stefanie as well. In this way, Zola steps on the toes of X, Stefanie's pimp, and takes charge of the situation. As men come in and out of the hotel room to have sex with Stefanie, we get a montage scene. Something important to note for this scene is that we get full frontal shots of the men, but never of Stefanie. Clips of men's faces, torsos, and crotches scroll down on screen. The effect here is that you're scrolling on an Instagram feed. At one point, the clip stops on a man's crotch, and a heart similar to an Instagram like reaction pops up on screen. I found this sex scene to be refreshing in a way. Usually during a sex scene, we position the woman as the one who is full frontal. And I am of the personal belief that social media has done a lot of harm in commodifying women's sexuality for men's entertainment. So it's somewhat refreshing to see the tables turned here. Though I found the sex scenes between Annie and Vanya to be lackluster and uninspired, I will say I did find the end scene of Anora to be pretty poignant. Here was the only time I felt like I could see Annie for who she truly was, a broken person who equated having sex with love, or that she felt like she had to engage in sexual behaviors in order to thank someone, because why else would someone be nice to her? I just wish we saw more of that throughout the film. I know that some people might say, well, that's the whole point. Annie's character is so closed off that we don't see the real her until the end. But unfortunately, this brief flicker of authenticity does not erase the past 2 hours where all Annie was to the men in the movie and seemingly the audience was a sex worker whose hardships were used for cheap laughs. I felt so frustrated leaving Anora because I saw so much potential in Annie's character and felt like the writing of the film did her a disservice. And what bothered me even more was the Oscar buzz around a movie that I felt like dropped the ball, on top of not saying anything fresh or exciting. Of course, it is all subjective, and I know people who love Anora, and you're entitled to your opinion. But It Girl Kaylin's analysis of the movie just rings in my head, because why wasn't Taylour Paige afforded the same conversation? Much like the history of Black burlesque dancers, is this another case of Black performers having to work twice as hard to be included in the conversation? Frankly, to use an internet term, it seems like Anora reheated Zola's nachos. Zola has all the elements that made Anora exciting. The action, the comedy, the drama. But it had this tenderness and realness that Anora lacked. So my hope is that by talking about Zola, which continues to be one of my favorite movies, you watch it and share it with your film-loving friends. Thank you for tuning in to Silver Screen Queens. If you are interested in learning more about Black burlesque dancers and strippers, I would highly recommend checking out Intellectual Media's video posts about them, which I'll link below. She is much more of a historian than I am. Thank you again, and that's all, folks.